Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the next in the Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation webinar series. My name is Kara Garrett and I will be the moderator of this series. This webinar will last about 30 minutes and it will be recorded. Please type any questions into the Q&A portion of the screen and we will answer as quickly as possible. After our featured speaker has completed their presentation, we will be holding a question and answer session. If you have any questions after the webinar has concluded, we will be providing contact information for the program to allow you to reach out directly. All webinar documentation, including the PDF of the PowerPoint, recording of this webinar, and all other related documentation discussed during this presentation will be available at our website, and I dropped the link to that website in the chat. It is the Wildfire Public Education page. Should you encounter any issues, please do not hesitate to give me a call at 916-201-5539. And also you can send me an email that's also in that chat. Today's webinar will feature information from our Defensible Space Program on campfire safety. And I will now turn it over to your presenter, Chief John Morgan, to introduce himself and share more information. Take it away, Chief.
Awesome, thanks, Kara. My name is John Morgan. I'm the Deputy Chief of Wildfire Preparedness. And today we're going to talk a little bit about campfire safety. Joining us also is Assistant Chief Heather McCulley, who runs the Defensible Space Program for CAL FIRE. And we also have multiple other staff on the line, Natasha Fouts and Pasha Kashkuli, who will be helping us along with Kara to moderate and watch for your questions and comments in the chat and the Q&A source portion. A lot of information can be found at readyforwildfire.org, and that's a great site for in general to get a lot of great public information and that type of thing. But today we'll really try to focus in on campfire safety and how to try and navigate that thin line between having a good time while out and enjoying nature and also being extremely careful and safe in what we're doing so that we don't inadvertently end up destroying what we love so much. We'll go over a little bit of regulation. We'll talk about the difference between a campfire permit versus a standard burning permit. We'll talk about safe alternatives, and we'll also talk about campfire tips. And then we'll wrap up the session with a question and answer time. And so if you do have questions between now and the end, please be sure to write those down. We have that question and answer portion here in the meeting. And we'll also have time, if we have time at the end, we'll try to allow for conversation as well. But we'll see how we go. Jumping right into some of those regulations, using a campfire as something we do while we're out enjoying nature is something we all reminisce about as kids or, during family functions and things like that. It's not always a terrible thing, but terrible things can happen if used improperly. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And part of that is simply knowing the regulation. What is the law behind using a campfire in California, especially? So keeping that in mind, we'll talk about two quick things. What does it mean when CAL FIRE suspends burn permits in the summer? And are you still allowed to use have a campfire during those times? And it all kind of depends. We definitely have to be cognizant of the fire hazard here in California, and we all know that huge conflagrations, mega wildfires have been occurring over the last 10 plus years, And so we need to do everything within our power to make sure we don't start a fire and subsequently destroy what we're trying to enjoy. So public resource code is kind of where we start to dive into some of that regulation. And the basics here, I'm not going to read every word on the screen, but and you'll have an opportunity to download this document later on in PDF form also. But what it really comes down to is making sure you know by checking with local fire resources when it is appropriate and where it is appropriate to have a campfire. We'll go into a little bit of the do's and don'ts here in a little bit, but you just have to know that during certain times of the year, especially now as we start to dive into summer, we regulate when and where fire can be used on a much stricter basis. So you always need to be looking at and reaching out to your local fire authorities to make sure you're on the same page. As you can see right now, most of the state is in a suspension period of burning, meaning typical burning, like if you were to, let's say you had some branches and things of that, and maybe some pine needles, leaves, and you're trying to create your defensible space. And many times throughout the fall and winter and spring, we would burn those items using a standard burn permit and to get rid of it. During suspension of burning, that type of burning is not allowed. So you would want to take that type of material to either chip it and use it in that way out away from the house, or you could take it to a designated area in your community. In my community, it's actually at the waste site, the dump, for lack of a better term, and we can take our brush there and they take care of it. So check in throughout your community and your resources to see where you might be able to take those items. Getting kind of into a little more of the difference as you go through these regulations, you start to see that burning landscape debris is a little bit different than having a campfire. So Public Resource Code 4423.3 talks about that and really starts to show the difference between them. And this is where we start to realize that campfires in general aren't necessarily prohibited unless they're specifically also called out in the proclamation of burn suspension. A lot of this can get a little bit a little boring for for some folks who don't get into codes and laws and things like that like I do, but make sure, again, as we come down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of what this code is trying to get across, that make sure you check with your local fire department to make sure that they haven't also suspended campfires. Now, mind you, there's always risk involved with having fire on the land at all, along with the great benefits of it as well. Neglecting a campfire can put you at a liability financially and criminally, though. So remember that when you're out there and you're enjoying this type of activity, that when something goes wrong, we can be held accountable for that. So it's important to note that that's also part of the code, part of the regulation, that neglect has a specific consequence. So make sure that you're really paying attention to that. And that's where you've always seen like Smokey Bear and talking about make sure that campfire is dead out and that type of thing. And that's where this really comes down to in these regulations. It doesn't just apply to an open campfire like you might, you set the rocks around it and build a low, but also in some cases, it can apply to camping stoves, ovens, drums, and other containers. So make sure you know what that specific campground allows and when and where you do need a permit. When talking about federal land, that's 4433 here. A written campfire permit is always necessary for use on federal land. So make sure you have those resources at your fingertips as well. And the great thing here is a state campfire permit and a federal campfire permit can be used interchangeably in those areas. So if you have one that's been issued through CAL FIRE's system, or if you have a campfire permit that's been issued through the federal system, they both work in both the state and federal jurisdictions. So that's a great thing to keep in mind. But again, the escape of any campfire from the control of any person can lead to a negligent circumstance in that situation. So make sure that you're following the regulations, the rules, and the safety suggestions on that permit as well. Moving through here, we do get into some health and safety codes, things of that nature. And that's what's really going to start to get down to liability for damage. Your due diligence is required because, again, while this is campfires are a good and fun and memorable experience, they can also lead to unintended consequences. So keep that in mind as you're enjoying that specific event. One of the big things here, the expense of fighting fire. As we all know, that can be quite expensive as fires grow in size and unfortunately sometimes grow in the financial impact to the community in and around where those major fires occur. So keep that in mind as well. You can take a look here at our sample. This is basically kind of shows a cooperative effort between federal and state partners where we use very similar campfire permits. You can take and follow that QR code there. That'll take you to additional safety information. And then here in just a second, I'll show you a link where you can go straight to the campfire permit application, where you can request a campfire permit right there from the comfort of your own home on your smart device or your computer. But again, this is a sample of a California campfire permit. Notice there, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, that this permit expires on December 31st of the year in which it was issued. So if you got a campfire permit right now, it would expire on December 31st. If you get a campfire permit on December 29th this year, it's going to expire in a couple of days on December 31st. So keep that in mind, that these campfire permits aren't necessarily a rolling 1-year permit. They're only good for the year in which they are obtained. So you basically have to get a new one each year. It's very similar to a burn permit in general. Realize that when you get a campfire permit, you're also agreeing to follow and comply with fire restrictions. So that's where it's extremely important to make sure you talk with those local fire officials and make sure you're paying attention to when those burn restrictions are implemented and how they're implemented. There's also clearance and fire size stipulations. So that's another way that campfire permits are different from kind of your residential burn permits for yard debris and that type of thing. So campfires are inherently much smaller, and that's intentional to keep that danger down. Always personally supervise your campfire until it's completely extinguished, and make sure it's completely dead out before you leave that campfire. Remember, hot coals can smolder for hours or even days. So making sure that you get water on that fire, making sure that you stir that up completely and that all of those embers are cold is essential, not only for you and your family's safety, but also the forest and the other individuals around. California state parks. We get a question quite often about, can you burn in a state park? And the question or the answer is, as long as there's a official campfire area. So you'll notice where campfires are allowed, typically by seeing an established campfire ring at the campsite. Sometimes they have a concrete border around them. Sometimes they are stacked rocks. Sometimes they are steel rings, but you will see a definite campfire ring at the campsite. These are in established campsites. You're not going to find this out in the wild forest, so to speak. So keep that in mind, that when you find a campsite out in the middle of nowhere, that may not, you'll see maybe some rocks put in a ring. That may not be a safe place for you to have a campfire. So getting into that and really looking at kind of some of those safe alternatives and what you're trying to not only avoid, but also recognize as a safe or unsafe situation, starts to really set in, especially when you're outside of an established campground. Some of the safe alternatives that we can get into, think about using a fire pit, and propane fire pit specifically. I have this exact same model, though that's not me in the picture. This can be a really great alternative. The nice part about propane is that you're not going to get all those sparks and embers flying in the wind. Of course, there's still that inherent danger of having an open flame, so keep that safety in mind still. And of course, you're still going to need a permit for this, but this is one way for you to mitigate the embers and sparks from blowing into nearby vegetation. That burning wood just simply is inherent that it's going to get sparks and embers. Propane stoves, as mentioned before, many times propane stoves, even these smaller ones that sit on a tabletop, still need a campfire permit, but it's a great alternative to cooking rather than building a fire and cooking over a wood-fired campfire, because again, all of the embers and sparks and things of that nature that come off of that and can drift in the wind, that's mitigated here. Of course, there's a lot of safety that's still built into cooking with gas, so make sure you're still following those safety rules and suggestions. Now, if you're not looking to cook, but you do want a fire experience, there are some artificial fire alternatives out there. And not only are these fire safe in a forest fire sense, but they're also safe for children who might be running around. And we do see a lot of that where people and young children, especially, will accidentally trip and fall into a campfire. And what do we usually do when we fall is we put our hands out, and that's typically what receives the worst burns are the person's hands as they try to stop themselves from falling. Of course, we do see worse injuries than that, but I can tell you, none of that is fun. So if this is a viable alternative for you, I'd say go for it, because it comes without the heat. There are some fun things that you can do. So think about, this is a picture of kids having glow sticks and the glow rings and things of that nature. You can also use glow in the dark face paint, glow in the dark tattoos and bubbles. There's a ton of fun options out there for kids to use, and they don't involve the dangers of actual fire. So think about that, not only when you're camping, but maybe next time you're in the cul-de-sac and you're celebrating 4th of July, and you're just out there waiting for someone to get hurt by those fireworks and things of that nature. So keep it safe and sane. Also, flashlight tag is another great option. You get plenty of light and plenty of fun, and the kids and the adults love it also. Solar lights for having around the campsite. I actually have some that look like tiki torches, but they're just solar lights that you can place around the campfire or the campsite, and you get that ambiance of having something there. And then, of course, going back to stargazing, enjoy the fact that you're out in wilderness and you can actually see through that layer of atmosphere that down in the city sometimes you can't. The smog can occlude those stars, and when you get up there in the mountains, take that time to maybe just enjoy God's creation above you. Some campfire tips before you get started. Obviously, go for those campfire permits. Make sure you have the correct permit and you're following those guidelines on that permit for the safety. Check to ensure there aren't any local fire restrictions in the area, and especially during periods of high fire danger, like right now as we go into summer. Look at making sure that you have the proper tools, having a shovel, having a bucket of water nearby at all times. And something a lot of times we don't think about, but preventing the spread of invasive species. Weeds and seeds can be carried in firewood from outside the area. So it's important to go to those established campfire areas and get campfire wood from the area that you are actually having your campfire. We're not talking about going down and cutting down a bunch of trees and that type of thing, but many times at established campsites, you're going to have that camp host who has campfire wood there at the campsite. When you are going to move forward and have a campfire, make sure you select a good level open location that's far away from other fuels and logs and things of that nature. You don't want leaves and needles up around your campfire, because that can inadvertently accept sparks and it becomes a readily available bed for the spread of fire. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your location. You also want to scrape away any of that dead grass or leaves and needles in the area to give yourself a nice open and cleared area for your campfire. Scoop out a depression in the center of that cleared area and make your campfire ring there. You really want to have that fire kind of in a lower depression area so that you don't get rolling debris and end up with a hot coal or something rolling down a hill. So make sure you're thinking about that as you go through your campfire site selection. And then you don't want to burn huge logs. You want to use smaller cut campfire wood in short lengths and pile it in smaller piles. Again, we don't want to use this as a brush burning exercise, right? This is a small controlled campfire. So keep that that thought process in mind as you go through this. Always keep that fire as small as you can and never larger than necessary. I know we all kind of get caught up in that bonfire mentality at times, and that's something we really need to stay away from to keep that safe environment as we're going through this. Now, as mentioned before, you're always going to want to have the tools at hand that you would need to put that fire out. And we're not talking about, only in the campfire site, but you might notice a small fire starting to spark up from an ember that blew a little ways away. And that's also why you want to have a shovel and a bucket of water nearby, is to prevent and or extinguish other small fires that start as a result of your campfire. So it's not only the campfire that you should be thinking about with these tools. And again, never leave your fire unattended, and never leave your children unattended around a campfire. When you're all finished, you want to completely extinguish that campfire. Use that drown and stir method and make sure you feel that the coals in that campfire have been completely extinguished. So what you do here is you pour water on that and you stir it up. You dig it up with that shovel, and then you pour more water on there. You stir it some more. And sometimes this can take some time to actually get the heat dissipated out of your campfire area. Once you've done this numerous times and you can see that there's no more steam, no more smoke coming out of there, you'll want to dig that around again and then feel with the back of your hand, not necessarily shoving your hand in the coals, right? But bringing your hand close to where the ground level is, where those ashes were, and coming down to feel if the heat is actually completely gone out of your campfire area. Remembering, campfires, they're traditional, they're fun, and they're essential at times. Sometimes we have to have a campfire in order to stay warm, in order to feed ourselves, so it's not something that we shouldn't have, but if we are going to have a campfire, we have to do it in a safe and responsible way. You can learn a lot more at many of these websites. So we have What We Do and the Fire Safety Outreach website at fire.ca.gov/what we do. Fire Safety Outreach. And then, of course, for Defensible Space, fire.ca.gov/dspace. Readyforwildfire.org is another really great website for a lot of fire prevention education. And you can also get a burn permit, a campfire permit from there. One that's not here, but I'll mention it anyway, is burnpermit.fire.ca.gov. And while that site is typically used for burning our branches and brush around homes in the process of creating D-space, you can also get a campfire permit from that site in the apply box. So keep that in mind. Next time you're getting your burn permit, you can also get your campfire permit. Also, you can visit the Office of State Fire Marshal website for a lot of great information there, and get more information about all these great webinars that Kara hosts at the osfm.fire.ca.gov/wildfire-public-education page. All right, with that, we can jump into questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chief. So for our attendees, if you would like to raise your hand, if you have a question, go ahead and we'll give it a couple of seconds. Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much, Chief and team, for being here and providing this wonderful presentation. I'm going to go ahead and take over the screen and talk about our next webinar. So join us for the next one on July 24th with the same exact team. We're keeping it going. We're keeping it going. So it will be on July 24th at 11:30 to talk about defensible space and keeping it clean in the heat. So thank you all again for joining us today. We will get this recording uploaded on YouTube and posted on the website. And I see no questions, so I will go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.